A billionaire's family spent years waiting for one thing, his money. But the person who changed his life didn't want a single dollar. At 76, Malcolm Kingsley had $1 billion empire, a mansion, luxury cars, and absolutely no reason to smile. His own children visited him asking about company control, properties, and inheritance. Then one rainy morning, his maid arrived with her 2-year-old son, Micah. The toddler looked at the cold, powerful billionaire and said, "Smile." Malcolm refused. So Micah walked over, reached up with his tiny fingers, and physically pushed the corners of Malcolm's mouth upward. And for the first time in years, the billionaire laughed. From that day on, Micah called him Grandpa Malcolm. But when Malcolm's greedy son saw how close they were becoming, he became terrified. Because shortly afterward, Malcolm called his attorney and said 7 words that would change the entire family. "I want to change my will." At 76, Malcolm Kingsley had everything a man could buy. $1 billion business empire, a mansion overlooking Atlanta, luxury cars he rarely drove, and more money than his grandchildren could spend in several lifetimes. But there was one thing Malcolm hadn't had in years: a reason to smile. Since his wife Lorraine died, Malcolm had become cold and distant. His son Darius and daughter Monica visited often, but Malcolm knew exactly why. "Dad," Darius said one Sunday, "you should transfer control of the company before your health gets worse." Monica nodded. "And maybe put the properties in our names, just to make things easier." Malcolm slowly lowered his coffee. Easier for whom? Neither answered. Malcolm had spent his life building a fortune for his family. Now he wondered whether his fortune was the only reason his family still came around. Then one rainy morning, his maid, Nia Carter, arrived carrying her 2-year-old son, Micah. "My babysitter canceled," Nia explained nervously. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kingsley. It won't happen again." Malcolm looked at the little boy. Micah stared back. Malcolm frowned. Micah frowned too. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Micah raised both. "What are you doing?" Malcolm asked. Micah pointed at him. "You look mad." Nia nearly dropped her cleaning supplies. "Micah," but Malcolm leaned forward. "I always look like this." Micah walked toward him. "Smile."
"What?"
"Smile." "I don't smile on command." Micah reached up and pushed the corners of Malcolm's mouth upward with his tiny fingers. Malcolm froze. Then, he laughed. A deep, unexpected laugh filled the room. Nia stared at him. She had worked there almost a year. She had never heard that sound. From then on, whenever Micah came to the mansion, he searched for Malcolm. "Grandpa Malcolm." Malcolm pretended to hate the nickname. "I'm not your grandfather." Micah would grin. "Grandpa." And somehow, 5 minutes later, the billionaire would be sitting on the carpet racing toy cars. Micah didn't know Malcolm was rich. He didn't understand billions. To him, Malcolm wasn't a businessman. He was simply a lonely old man who needed someone to play with. One afternoon, Darius arrived unexpectedly. Through the window, he saw his father in the garden with Micah sitting on his shoulders. Malcolm was laughing. Darius didn't smile. Later, he cornered Nia. "My father seems very attached to your son. Micah loves spending time with him." "I'm sure he does." Nia heard the accusation in his voice. "What are you saying?" "My father is worth billions. My son doesn't know what a billionaire is." Darius stepped closer. "But you do." A voice came from behind them. "And so do you." Darius turned. Malcolm stood there. "Nia has worked in this house for a year," Malcolm said. "She's never asked me for anything." Then he looked directly at his son. "You ask for something every time you walk through that door." That night, Malcolm sat alone in his study. He looked at an old photograph of his late wife. Then, at another photograph taken that afternoon. Micah was on his shoulders. Malcolm was smiling. He picked up his phone. "Mr. Harris?" His attorney answered. Malcolm took a long breath. "I want to change my will." 3 weeks later, Nia heard a crash from the dining room. She ran inside. Malcolm was on the floor. "Mr. Kingsley." Micah ran behind her. When he saw Malcolm, his little face filled with fear. "Grandpa." Malcolm's eyes opened. Even while struggling to breathe, he smiled at the boy. An ambulance rushed him to the hospital. Within hours, Darius and Monica arrived. So did relatives Malcolm hadn't seen in months. But when the nurse asked Malcolm who he wanted beside him, he whispered two names: Nia and Micah. Inside the hospital room, Micah climbed onto a chair. "Grandpa's sick." "A little," Malcolm whispered. Micah touched his cheek. "Smile." Malcolm's eyes became wet. Then he smiled. "There." Micah nodded. "Better." Outside, Darius watched through the glass. And something changed in his face. He knew his father had recently met with his attorney. He was terrified that Micah and Nia were about to take everything. Over the next few days, Malcolm's health mysteriously worsened. One evening, Nia entered his room and noticed a white pill beside his water. She called the nurse. "Is this his medication?" The nurse examined it.
No.
Nia turned. Darius was standing in the doorway. His face went pale. "You put this here," Nia whispered. "Be careful what you accuse me of." "I'm calling security." Darius grabbed her wrist. "You don't understand this family." A weak voice came from the bed. "Let her go." Darius froze. Malcolm was awake. He stared at his son. "I spent my life making sure you would never know poverty." His voice cracked. "But I forgot to teach you that money isn't worth losing your soul." Security removed Darius. The pill was tested. It wasn't poison, but it could dangerously interfere with Malcolm's heart medication. Investigators discovered Darius had hoped to make his father appear mentally incompetent so the new will could be challenged. 2 nights later, Malcolm suffered a massive heart attack. Nia stood beside his bed. Micah held his hand. "Grandpa." Malcolm slowly looked toward him. Micah didn't understand death. He only knew his friend looked sad. So he reached up, touched Malcolm's cheek, and whispered, "Smile." A tear rolled down Malcolm's face. Then his lips slowly lifted. Micah smiled back. "Better." A tiny laugh escaped Malcolm. And seconds later, the billionaire died smiling. After the funeral, the family gathered for the reading of the will. Darius expected billions. Monica expected properties. But Malcolm had recorded a final message. His face appeared on a television. "My children will not inherit control of my fortune." Darius jumped up. "What?" Malcolm continued. "My grandchildren will receive protected trusts. The rest of my estate, approximately $6.2 billion, will go to the Lorraine Kingsley Foundation." Darius slowly relaxed, until Malcolm said, "The foundation's principal trustee will be..." A pause. "Nia Carter." Everyone turned. Nia's mouth fell open. "No." Darius exploded. "I knew it." But Malcolm continued. "Nia does not personally inherit my fortune. She cannot spend it on herself." His recorded eyes seemed almost alive. "I chose her because she understands something my family forgot. Money should serve people. People should never serve money." Then the attorney handed Nia a small envelope. And Malcolm left one personal inheritance to Micah. Darius laughed bitterly. Of course. But there was no money inside. Only a photograph. Malcolm sitting in the garden with Micah on his shoulders. Both laughing. On the back were the words, "To the little boy who met a billionaire and only wanted his smile." Nia began crying. Then the attorney placed an old wooden box on the table. "There is one more thing." Nia opened it. Inside was a faded photograph. The moment she saw the woman in it, she stopped breathing. "I know her." Everyone stared. Nia's hands began shaking. "That's my great-grandmother." The attorney nodded. Her name was Ruth Carter. Nia stared at him. How did Malcolm have her photograph? The attorney handed her Malcolm's final letter. Nia began reading. "When I was 9 years old, my mother and I were almost homeless. My father had disappeared, and my mother became sick. One woman helped us. Her name was Ruth Carter." Nia's eyes filled with tears. Ruth wasn't wealthy. In fact, she was almost as poor as we were. But she brought us food. And when our landlord threatened to evict us, she gave my mother the money she had been saving for months. Nia covered her mouth. Her great-grandmother had saved Malcolm's family. The letter continued. Years later, when I became wealthy, I searched for Ruth. But she had already died. I never knew what happened to her family until Nia walked into my house. Nia remembered something. During her first week working for Malcolm, an old family photograph had fallen from her wallet. Malcolm had picked it up. He had stared at it for several seconds. At the time, she didn't understand why. Now she did. Malcolm had recognized Ruth. The letter continued. At first, I thought God had given me a chance to repay an old debt. Then I met Micah. And I understood. Kindness isn't a debt. It's a chain. Ruth helped a frightened little black boy who had nothing. Decades later, her great-granddaughter cared for that same boy when he became an old man. And her great-great-grandson taught him how to smile again. The room fell silent. Even Monica was crying. The attorney revealed Malcolm's final wish. The foundation would build affordable housing, childcare centers, scholarships, and small business programs in struggling communities. Its first center would be named the Ruth Carter Center. Nia broke down. Her great-grandmother had died without wealth, but her kindness had survived her. Months later, the Ruth Carter Center opened. Hundreds of families came. Children filled its halls. At the entrance hung two photographs. One showed Ruth Carter. The other showed Malcolm laughing with Micah. Underneath were the words, "What we keep disappears. What we give can outlive us." Years later, when Micah was old enough to understand, he asked his mother, "Was Grandpa Malcolm really a billionaire?" Nia smiled. "Yes." "Then why didn't he leave me any money?" Nia handed him the photograph Malcolm had left behind. "Because you gave him something money couldn't buy." Micah looked confused. "What?" Nia touched his cheek. "You loved him before you knew he was rich." Micah looked at Malcolm's smiling face. Slowly, he remembered. The toy cars. The garden. Sitting on Malcolm's shoulders. And one word he used to say whenever the old man looked sad. Smile. Nia nodded. Exactly. Malcolm's family had wanted his billions. His relatives wanted his houses. Businessmen wanted his companies. But a 2-year-old boy had wanted none of it. He only wanted the lonely old man to laugh with him. And Malcolm Kingsley spent 76 years building a fortune, only to learn from a toddler that the greatest wealth in life wasn't something you could leave in a will. It was knowing that when everything else disappeared, someone would still remember your smile.